You will have heard it said that tabletop wargaming is incredibly expensive, especially premium brands like Warhammer. In this video, we will present the case that indeed it is expensive, and the case that no, it is not expensive. Then you can judge for yourself. The case for it being expensive. Number 1, excessive premiums. It so happens that in the Warhammer world of tabletop wargaming, a little plastic man this high can cost as much as £25 retail. By mass, that little plastic man may weigh as little as 3 grams. That works out at about £8 per gram. At the time of making this video, the spot price for pure silver bullion can cost as little as 63 pence per gram. While at the other end of the precious metals market, the spot price of pure gold can be as much as £42 per gram. That means our little plastic man is squarely in the same price bracket as precious metals, or indeed illegal narcotics. Hence why some stalwarts in the hobby refer to Warhammer as plastic crack. Number 2, escalating ancillary costs. One can hardly get away with playing Warhammer with just a few of these little plastic men. Typically, one will want dozens and perhaps hundreds. Then they should be assembled, painted, requiring further costs in paints, brushes, glues and other tools. Then the little plastic men will be fielded on a special table, complete with special model scenery, each with their own costs. That's not all, the models consume space, requiring storage options both for at home and for transporting away. The games themselves require extensive rules, often spread over numerous rulebooks. There is no real upper limit to how much one can spend on Warhammer, or indeed wargaming, but most wargamers will spend hundreds of pounds even before they play their first game, and typically they will spend many thousands over the course of their hobby. Oh, it may be argued that Warhammer is not the only way to do tabletop wargaming, and indeed other brands may be a bit cheaper. True, but in the end, as a game, it will always be expensive because the game pieces you require are numerous, material and quite luxurious. 3. Close alternatives to war games are quite significantly cheaper. The test of expensiveness ultimately comes down to what the cost of alternative solutions would be. The closest alternatives to wargaming would be board games and computer games. In the case of board games, strategy games in the board game format can be exceedingly cheap due to the use of heavy abstraction in the presentation of their game pieces. This is something that war games can hardly compete with. In these modern times, there are still more options for playing war games using these newfangled devices called computers. Oh, computers are an expense in themselves for sure. However, if one is having a computer for other purposes, then that one-off cost can largely be discounted. A complete playable war game as software can be obtained for as little as £30. Such a game likely indulges in very high levels of glorious simulation, even including animation, while costing no more than a board game. Examples would be those games from the Total War strategy series, which indeed now has its own take on the Warhammer lore. Conclusion: even disregarding premium options, wargaming is expensive because comparable alternatives like board games and computer games are enormously less expensive. The case for it being inexpensive. 1. Minimum buy-in matters. For wargaming in general, it is not appropriate to judge wargaming by its premium options. To do so is comparable to judging the cost of air travel by business class and private jets. It is true for anything that there is no real upper limit to how much one can spend on it if one can and will. Even chess would be expensive if one insisted on having all one's game pieces hand carved from real ebony and ivory by famous artisans. Warhammer. The real test is the cost of minimum buy-in. And for wargaming, that is virtually zero. Oh indeed, detailed resin miniatures hand painted by professionals would indeed make the game very expensive. That may well be desirable, but not necessary. Game pieces and scenery can be crafted from household waste and paper photocopies at virtually no cost. And usable rules can be downloaded for free from certain companies and gaming communities. Besides some dice and a tape measure, that's all one really needs to play wargaming. This approach is sometimes called Warhammer, as a super cheap alternative to Warhammer, but a similar thing can be done for any wargame. 2. Premiums include hidden value. Demonstrating the minimum buy-in is sufficient to prove that tabletop wargaming is inexpensive. However, I do think there is something to be said to excuse the premium pricing of certain brands like Warhammer. The most notoriously expensive vendor in wargaming is of course Games Workshop and its sister company Forge World. Interestingly, their products are also among the most best-selling. Too expensive hardly seems to stack up alongside best-selling. Yet somehow it does. Free gaming areas are included. Part of Games Workshop's business model includes providing substantial support to their customers' hobbying activities through a global network of specialist retail shops. A tangible example of this is the provision of free gaming spaces, sacrificing valuable shelf space in the process. The cost of this community support is of course bundled in with the product price. The premium here then is comparable to the premium that pubs charge on alcohol over what is charged by supermarkets. The price includes support for a social space. No doubt the ultimate aim for this is as a loss leader for generating sales, but nonetheless it is more or less valued part of the product and included in the product price. This economies of small scale production. Although wargaming through Warhammer is approaching mainstream awareness, it still remains something of a niche market. There is a limited market for sales, while at the same time that market has a demand for an enormous variety of designs. This means very small production runs for each design. Consequently, the fixed costs of tooling and design represents a relatively large proportion of the sticker price compared with variable costs like the plastic material. Ooh, piles of shame! As painful as it is to pay £25 for a little plastic infantryman, most of us in the hobby still end up with vast stashes of these kits, unassembled, unpainted and often unopened. We in the hobby often refer to these stashes as piles of shame, because of course we feel embarrassed by these unused purchases. Often our piles of shame grow faster than our painted collections. One can almost age a hobbyist by the size of his piles. The reason for these piles of shame is that despite the financial cost, the real cost is the time it takes to paint and assemble them. In a sense, the £25 it takes to buy the little man is the smaller part of the cost in time that it takes to build and paint them. That may sound like an argument that wargaming is even more expensive. However, an expense that is stored rather than consumed is less a cost and more an investment. Regardless, the existence of piles of shame in every hobbyist's life is evidence that the sticker price is not such a huge barrier. Too expensive in time to paint perhaps, but not too expensive to buy with money. 3. Persistent value assets and added value. Any shrewdly thrifty person can warn you, anything you can buy that is not immediately consumed will tend to lose value over time. The word for this is depreciation. In general, everything depreciates, even currency. Only a rare few items tend to actually increase value over time. Fine wines, paintings by the old masters, handcrafted furniture and, strangely enough, wargaming kits. The combination of special interest, nostalgia and limited production runs can result in wargaming kits actually increasing in value over time. Is it really an expense if the thing purchased is worth more when resold than it cost to buy? Thrifty people don't call that an expense, they call that an investment. If it is not an expense, then it cannot be expensive. Although miniatures can be lost, damaged and stolen, they are for the most part durable. Their value persists through time, even if they do not happen to appreciate. There is not much in the hobby that is truly consumable. Even the paint, if artfully applied, is not so much consumed as transformed. Adding value. If one can master the craft of painting and converting miniatures, then the way is open to do more than ride the time-defying wave of appreciation and actually add value. A really good paint job can considerably multiply the value of a kit, with the caveat that a poor paint job and assembly can dramatically lower the value of a kit. Certain persons even make a trade out of the added value from painting miniatures. As I do myself, see the link in the description. These aspects of appreciation and added value are hardly present at all in the alternatives of board games and computer games. Conclusion! Wargaming, even Warhammer, is not expensive because it is only as expensive as you want it to be. Moreover, it is even possible to make the hobby a profitable one. A very rare thing among hobbies. Expensive is a relative concept. Whether something is expensive or not depends not just on the objective costs of production, but also on the relative resources and strength of desire in the potential buyer. For the investment-minded, it also depends on the subject's potential for appreciation or depreciation. In the end, whether something's expensive or not is a subjective value judgment. So, would you like to know why I'm wearing gloves in the house? Well, I'll tell you. It's because I didn't pay for the heating, because I spent all my money on Warhammer. Okay then, like, subscribe, sharing is caring, and watch this video.